Hello and welcome to another episode of the Diabetes Tour Guide. My name is Andy and I'm your host along this tour of diabetes, and we're on another interview episode, and I'm so excited to introduce Derek Morgan, not only because he has a very interesting story with diabetes, but also because he is our next door neighbor. We're in our West Knoxville clinic, and we've just moved right across the street from where we were, and we're right next to Vital Wellness. And so if you just kind of tell the audience a little bit about what you do and what Vital Wellness is. I know that y'all have been part of the podcast before, so this is not new, but we'll have a new spin on this. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks for having me. And so Vital Wellness is a clinic that was born out of a family physician practice years ago. It was Vital Signs. It's relaunched as Vital Wellness recently. I've come on as general manager. What we do is focused on workshops, coaching, personal training, group exercise, and our target is mostly folks with metabolic disease. So that might be type 2 or even type 1 diabetes. Also people that may have had like a recent early onset dementia or early Alzheimer's diagnosis.
Yeah.
Those are the folks that we primarily work with. And of course we share the space with Zach, who does Rock Steady Boxing and is working with the Parkinson's community here.
And that's such a huge asset to the community. I'd almost say when you're describing that, it's like Americans. That's like, is that your target audience?
Kinda, yeah.
Americans, the American lifestyle.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too is just being in a very stressful environment. Metabolic syndrome could just happen. So we're seeing a lot of metabolic syndrome. If you eat in America, you probably have a little bit of metabolic, like a touch of it.
Yeah,
it's there.
The standard American diet, or the SAD diet, as we call it, is going to, unfortunately, is going to promote health problems over time.
I know. But too, I'm glad that we're actually having things in medicine that are trending more towards how do we look at this person from a holistic standpoint, because so much of it is we have to get moving in the right way, eat the right things, and also have a different life, like almost like a different mindset about stress.
Yeah, and that's what our workshops do. So we're focused on teaching people about, not just the nutrition and the exercise components, but also the importance of sleep. And we don't even like to call it stress management, because when you tell people they have too much stress in their life, that stresses them out. So we think about it in terms of peace and just helping people, because you're always going to have stress, right? You can't get rid of the stress in your life. You just have to manage it. So we talk about it in those 4 pillars of peace, sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
I love that, talking about peace.
Yeah.
That's even like a therapeutic way to say, like, okay, I don't have stress. You're still using the negative and you're still using the word stress, but say, how do I have peace?
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, podcast done. Everyone go home. I'm kidding. No, okay. Now we're going to start the real stuff too. So we're talking about diabetes, and you have a very interesting story with your diagnosis. So too, if you'll tell us a little bit about when you were diagnosed, what that day was like.
Yeah, that was, I'll never forget it. It was President's Day, almost 2 years ago. So my symptoms started 2 years ago this month. It was all COVID related. We can get into more detail about that or not, either way.
No, totally. And I actually think this is important too, because with COVID, both with COVID and with the vaccine, and really with anything that's going to cause a stress to your system, any sort of stressor can induce autoimmune attack. So 2 years was that happened with you.
Yeah, it was specifically vaccine related. My symptoms started within weeks, and I had COVID, and we talked about previously. It was not a big event for me, but for whatever reason, the vaccine, it seems like, triggered some symptoms that started, the classic stuff of extreme fatigue, extreme thirst, really dry skin. My vision changed. It seemed like overnight. Before I knew it, I'd lost 10 pounds really fast. I knew something was up at that point. We're past the holidays. Nobody loses 10 pounds over the holidays, right? That was just not right. I made an appointment to see my primary, and that took a while to get scheduled. So in early February, I saw him, and I got a call back from him. And it was, like I said, President's Day, and I can still remember it was probably the worst day of work I'd had in easily 15 years. Is one of those, and I worked in healthcare technology at the time and had spent about 25 years in technology total. was one of those days where you realize there's a bad problem. It's not going to get fixed easily, and you're probably going to be working on it for a while.
Yeah.
All of this is sort of sinking in as I'm on this huge bridge of people, a bunch of different teams. Some of them are angry, some are confused, all that. I look down and there's the number from my primary care. And I answered it thinking it was going to be the nurse, and it was my doctor. And I remember immediately saying, "Hey, doc, you don't call with good news." And he said, "No, you need to come back in." So I went back in, and from that point on, I was just in a complete fog. I've got people coming in showing me how to inject with insulin pens. They're explaining counting carbs. And I remember I honed in on the word carb, and I sort of filed that away. And I went home and I started researching. Obviously, work was out the window the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was really blessed because I immediately found some groups. Of course, you go to places like Facebook, and there are dozens of groups. And I found one, and they mentioned a Dr. Bernstein, and I filed him away. And I went back to look at him later, because that whole carb counting thing triggered something in me that I pushed back against. I just felt like it was a sentence that was hung on me. It would be, I guess, for anybody, right?
For sure. Well, especially being you're adept with nutrition.
Yeah,
this is within your vein.
Well, and that was not a professional thing at the time. That was more of a hobby. I had been an athlete my whole life. I taught group exercise on weekends at the Y just for fun. I taught martial arts. I boxed amateur even in my late 40s. So I understood how to eat, how to make weight, and I could count macros and all that. But this just felt different. It just felt like a sentence. And so I was really struggling with the idea of having to constantly be at the beck and call of my blood sugars, right?
Yes.
I'm sure you can relate.
100%. I've described it as a math problem you can never get right, but you have to keep doing it.
Yeah,
it's a lot
totally.
Yeah,
so I picked up Dr. Bernstein's books, and then I discovered another doctor named Keith Runyon and a few other folks, and I just started grabbing resources, and I came quickly to the conclusion that I was going to go strict low carb, probably for all intents and purposes a keto diet. I wasn't necessarily aiming for ketosis, but I was going to go that approach to manage this. And some of my thinking was simplistic. I was just like, I'll just never eat carbs, and then I won't need insulin. That's not exactly how this works, but the nugget in the center of all that was on the right track. And so I started to learn, I started to adapt to that, and spent months just really getting my eating dialed in so that I could get my insulin dialed in. And within 6 months, just to give you some context, when I got diagnosed, my A1C was over 13.6 something. It was pretty high. Blood sugar was well over 400. I was probably heading for an emergency, right? And within 6 months, I went back to the endocrinologist, and my A1C was 5.6.
Wow.
And my average blood sugars, I think after the first week, I never went out of range, and out of range to me was anything over 140.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The diet was working, and
this is with or without insulin?
This was with insulin. So I started out on Tresiba, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to make this work for as long as possible. If I can get by without having to do fast acting and just not worry about the bolus part and just focus on the eating with the the slow release insulin, then that's my strategy. And it's 2 years in, it's still working.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of key points and things that we're going to have in future episodes too when we do our educational series on this outside of interviews. So we've talked about long-acting insulin. Tresiba is a long-acting versus short-acting. This is something that's injected once a day, once in the morning, or once at night that gives you a basal rate. It's basically something to last you. Tresiba technically is 42 hours duration of action. So technically, sometimes it could be dosed every other day. Most people do it once a day. But this still means that Derek has endogenous insulin. His own insulin is still working too, and he is doing a nutrition plan that's not stimulating insulin. Remember, carbohydrates, 90 to 100% of carbohydrates going to turn into sugar, have an insulin response. When we're going more for proteins and fats, the insulin response is drastically reduced. So when you do something ketosis or just a much lower limited carbohydrate nutrition plan, it totally works. And that's actually funny you say that. Before they had the advent of insulin, that was a treatment, is that you ate less.
Right.
They put these kids, primarily a disease that was diagnosed within the juvenile onset. They used to call it juvenile diabetes. They sent these kids to sanatoriums to basically take their food away, and they lived a little bit longer. So you have this, you have something called honeymoon phase whenever you get diagnosed with an autoimmune diabetes, which is what this is, type 1. And 2, you got antibodies tested. Is that correct?
I did, yeah. So very next day after meeting with my primary care, he sent me to an endocrinologist. They did the antibody test. I tested positive for GAD antibodies. I should also mention that, initially my C-peptides were almost not registering.
Wow.
So I had very little. My pancreas was just taking a knee, right?
Wow.
Not really doing anything. 6 months in was more or less the same. 1 year in, same fasting glucose numbers, right around 100. And my C-peptides were coming up substantially, and I don't remember the exact numbers at the moment, but after this most recent appointment, they were trending up again to the point where my endocrinologist took note. Said, well, that's interesting. We'll just keep an eye on that. Then I know that's a C-peptides and all that are a little mysterious, and your pancreas can do what it wants sometimes, and those sort of things. But it's not discouraging.
Not at all.
Right.
In fact, so C-peptide is when proinsulin becomes insulin. It is the cleaving off. So that's a measurement to see if you have active insulin. And so C-peptide means that mine would be 0 if we tested it. I've had diabetes or type 1 for 19 years. It's gone. But 2, with a little bit of that C-peptide activity, some is still left. And so sometimes they call this honeymoon phase. And 2, you can stay in it for a long time. It's just an interesting diagnosis because it's later in life. This is, was it scary?
I haven't mentioned my age.
Yeah, you don't. I know it's actually doesn't look it at all, but yes,
I was 52 when I was diagnosed, so I'll be 54 in a couple months.
It's unreal. It's not. I had a really great endocrinologist when I lived in LA. Her name was Dr. Ann Peters. She's brilliant. She has a book about type 1, and it says diabetes can be diagnosed at any age, any race, any gender, you name it. Technically, though, it's most common within the younger range. It's usually a kind of onset of puberty. So to have a later, mine at 15 is technically a late diagnosis.
Right.
At 52, I mean, that's a very, very late diagnosis. And so that just means that there was a genetic predisposition, and then we had a trigger. We had an environmental exposure. Yeah. Did you have any feelings with it? Like, I mean, not even if you want to go into that, like, were you mad? Were you sad? Like, was any of this, like, emotional for you?
Yeah, it not at first. I'm pretty stoic about things, I kind of just...
And very analytical. Like, hey, I'm going to approach this with it.
Yes, absolutely. Like, But I'll tell you this. I told one of my old close friends on the phone after, I don't know, it'd been almost a week before I talked to him. And he is not stoic.
Yeah.
Really emotional guy, but it was a good old friend who immediately fell apart when I told him.
Yeah.
And for me, that broke the dam. And so I spent the whole day probably just kind of letting myself grieve this whole new reality, and which was probably really healthy.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was like, okay, get up and move on, and just went back to, all right, how are we going to implement this new strategy? And so, yeah, I spent probably 4 months living in our basement with the house we'd moved into during COVID had a basement where somebody's dad had lived. So it had a mini kitchen and all that. And I thought, if I'm going to make this work, I have to separate my food from the rest of the family. And I got to make sure I have what I can eat on hand. And then I'm just going to eat and I'm going to watch and see what happens. And I was using a continuous monitor at the time. And so I really felt like my own lab experiment, right? I would make a meal, I would eat it, I would watch my blood sugar, I'd be okay, that's good. I would make sure if I was running out of something that I'd get more before it ran out, and I could just, that way I wasn't tempted to just, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat whatever I can find. And after 3 or 4 months, I felt like, okay, I've got a handle on this now, and I kind of have this, selection of food that I can go to that I know doesn't really bother me. And I started kind of reintegrating my food up into the kitchen on the main level with the rest of the family, and then started eating with them again. Yeah. And my wife was great. She's a great cook, but she was very accommodating to start figuring out, okay, how can I make meals that at least pull part of it out that I can have and then still feed the rest of the family? And because she really makes it a priority for us to try to eat together, pretty regularly. And that becomes really tricky, right?
Absolutely, because everything we do is related to activity and a lot of the times food. Yeah. Yeah. So that's not, and two, to have family support as well too.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
So two, you haven't had diabetes very long. Maybe you said 2 years. Going on 2 years. Has anything changed over? Like, what's changed for you with diabetes over the couple of years?
I keep waiting. I hear about the honeymoon phase, and my endocrinologist sort of prepared me in advance. It may not last forever. This last time we spoke, it was like, well, let's see how long we can keep this going.
Yeah.
So God willing, I'll next time we talk, I'll still be in my honeymoon phase with this. So
yes,
it hasn't really changed. I've been braced for change. In terms of just learning about this. Yeah. I think I've shifted more from the keto aspect or the low carb aspect of diet to really thinking about inflammation now.
Yeah.
That wasn't on my radar, but obviously, how intrinsically it's connected to, autoimmune diseases and chronic disease, and how important that is. And then beyond inflammation, even gut health. And these are some of the things we talk about at Vital Next Door, and we teach people on. So I'm trying to apply more of that. And that, eating keto to a lot of people is a challenge. But when you start looking at things like foods that are going to help with inflammation or promote inflammation, boy, you can go down a rabbit hole, and you really need some guidance.
Yes.
So that's where I'm at right now.
And even looking at it more from less technological. So too, you started off on CGM, but no longer using CGM.
That's right.
And going more into, I'm very in tune with how my body feels. How do I look at my gut health? And remember that gut is totally autoimmune related. It's what protects you from the outside world, these entrances into your body. So gut is vastly important. Yeah. And then two, inflammaging. So inflammation, dealing with the aging process and causing injury, keeping all that down, and especially looking at it from a nutritional standpoint. There was one point where Dad did, I was living in California at the time. He's like, you should just cut out all carbs. Just cut them all out, and you won't have to be on insulin. I was like, that is true. I could, but I didn't. But so much of it too. Yeah. There's a lot that we could do nutritionally, which is really cool. So, and two, a lot of new information, especially in the digital age where there's a lot online. I don't know if you've looked into the resources that are available for type 1s. There's a lot.
Yeah, I do. I really follow a handful of people. I keep up with, obviously, Dr. Bernstein.
Jonas.
Yeah, right.
You follow Nick Jonas, the most famous of the type 1s.
I still follow Dr. Bernstein, and he's amazing. The man's 89 years old, is a type 1, still more or less practicing. And, of course, Dr. Runyon, I've even corresponded with him. He's very accommodating, very kind. Dr. Eric Westman, some other folks that I've just tuned into. And then folks that are more generally looking at health and longevity that I use as resources and just to learn from. And, of course, I went back to school, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm an English degree, right, who worked in healthcare technology. And then after the diagnosis, I had always told my wife, I'm going to go back to school one day, but I have no idea what I'm going to do. And, I've got 4 kids, so there was never a really good time to do that.
Right, yeah.
So my oldest son's in grad school, and I'm in grad school too. I've got a junior in college and then 2 teenagers at home. After the diagnosis, I said, I know what I want to do now. I want to learn about this. So I went back and started studying nutrition, and I'm mostly wrapping up a master's in exercise science and nutrition right now. And I went back and did some certifications too, just to have the credentials to be able to do what I'm doing with Vital.
That's amazing.
Well, it's exhausting.
But that's making lemonade out of lemons. It's
Well,
like,
yeah.
how do I not only serve something that I'm interested in, but to also to help my body? A lot of time, too, in PA school, everybody kind of sometimes will go into it to be like, how do I fix somebody I know or help fix yourself? You end up diagnosing yourself with everything in PA school. Like,
I can
oh
see
yeah,
that.
that's me too. Okay, how do I get into that so I can help too? And two, to actually embody it and to experience it is a huge empathetic tool to help out patients that you all see.
100%. And that was really the motivation. It's, going back to school was more than just to learn for myself, but after getting, past the shock and really getting healthier, and honestly, I'm probably healthier now than I was 15, 20 years ago in some ways.
Yeah.
Eating this strict and keeping to a regimen, and just, I joke, hey, if there's one upside to a broken pancreas, I'm a 53-year-old man who can see his abs.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen,
there's an upshot.
It can happen. Okay. If you
Right.
can't see right now, this is the bodies we want. Okay. Well, yes.
Well, it's
we
all
welcome
eating.
you in the type 1 club. We want you.
Thank
Okay.
you. People always said it's mostly diet. It's not just working out. And I was a gym rat for years, and I always thought, yeah. But now I can honestly say for a fact it's mostly diet, and I don't have a choice. So.
And you see what it does to sugars and insulin response. It's
That's
very
right.
interesting.
But I wanted to be able to take that success that I've had so far, and hopefully will continue to have, and just help other people who need to hear it. Because I just see, especially even in the online community, a lot of the people who post are venting their frustrations, right?
Yes.
Of those ups and downs that they live with every day. And so my approach was really, you could summarize it as aim small, miss small. And that's really what I'm going for. I eat really focused and really low carbs so that I eliminate the roller coaster. I don't want to live that way. And that's why I don't do a continuous monitor anymore, because they're expensive, first of all, and insurance. People think insulin's, people who don't have diabetes, they just assume the insulin's the expense. It's all the other stuff that's expensive.
Gadgets and gizmos. Aplenty.
That's where
there's a lot.
Yeah, that's where they get you. So, I just stick my finger several times a day, and sometimes just once, to be honest, because I pretty much know what I'm going to see.
Absolutely. And two, there's a predictability to, especially with nutrition. There's a predictability to it, which I think too, that's how they used to say. It's changed a lot in how they've actually recommended nutrition. As a kid, for me, it was eat what you want, cover for what you eat, because they didn't want to develop these eating disorders for kids that were going and say, you can't participate in the birthday party. You can have ice cream once a month. So it became more of a cover what you eat, which also has its problems too, where you're still going to experience highs and lows with different types of carbohydrates that you're eating, slow and fast-acting carbs, and the fake sugars versus the real sugars.
How much fat was in the meal, and that's going to
Does it
factor into
buffer?
when it hits you.
Buffer. It's weird.
All that stuff. But that you hit on something that I was told early on. Don't deprive yourself. When I said, basically, this is my strategy. There's certain things that are dead to me now. Hey man, I love donuts as much as the next guy, but if it's not keto, I'm not going to eat it. And I heard several people say, you don't need to deprive yourself. But personally, I just did the math and said, that's worth it. If not depriving myself means chasing my blood sugar, and dealing with the unexpected, it's just not worth it. So I'm much happier living with, again, the aim small, miss small approach. And, it just eliminates a lot of drama. I can get on with other stuff in my life. And
that's great.
And I feel like diabetes isn't the dominant thing in my world.
Yeah. And it very well could be. It very well could be. So,
and I'm working with folks that is dominating their world, and the medications are dominating their world, and it's an expensive and discouraging thing to have to be, I guess, captive to, for lack of a better word. So I'm gonna fight. I'm going to fight that as much as I can. And if that means, passing on the donuts, then
I love it.
So
You've
be
been a
it,
fighter anyways. You've been a fighter your whole life. Yeah,
Yeah.
like physically
Yeah.
and literally. Okay, a couple more questions.
Yeah.
One thing that annoys you about diabetes and one thing you might actually enjoy about it.
Now, I already mentioned the one upshot is if you eat the way I'm eating, it has a lot of good physical benefits. One thing that really annoys me, gosh, I can't think of anything offhand that's more annoying. I could probably get going if I started. I wouldn't stop.
One of those if you're not really grinds my
don't-
gears.
Not a huge fan of needles, but hey,
Yeah.
that's just the reality of it. I also, this is a blessing and a curse. I know in advance when I'm about to get sick.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
I did everything the same yesterday and the day before, but today my blood sugar's higher. Oh, I'm fighting something. And then
Yes.
probably within 12 hours, I'll be like, oh, there it is, the scratchy throat or whatever. It's funny how that'll give you a clue. It's kind of annoying, but also interesting.
You get to know your body.
Yeah.
You get to know your body very well. We were talking earlier
Yeah.
before rolling. It's like I can feel it in my eyes. Like
Yeah.
my eyes are usually the first thing where I'm like, they feel almost glassy and just there's a pain behind them where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm running high. I can feel
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So it's just interesting to get used to your body. But also too, a nice benefit. I think that's a great benefit, an annoying thing and a benefit.
Yeah.
Like and kind of getting tuned to what your body is telling you. Now, do you think there will be a cure for diabetes?
That is an interesting question. I've read, of course, anybody who's been diagnosed with this is looking for hope. And I've read some interesting case studies of people who they think may have started regenerating the beta cells in their pancreas,
Right.
and those kind of stories that, you catch here and there. Of course, no doctor is going to lead with that with a patient and feed that kind of hope for them. But I back to our earlier conversation about inflammation and autoimmune diseases, gut health, all that. I wouldn't be surprised if, at least for some type 1s, they find some way to maybe either maximize production out of whatever beta cells are left in your pancreas
Right.
producing insulin, or maybe they find a way to make some of them regenerate in certain circumstances. I read a book, it was recommended to me by the doctor that owns Vital, and there's just one little reference to a polyphenol. No, I'm sorry. It was an antioxidant in mangoes that in an experiment with lab animals, in some instances, caused them to regenerate beta cells in their pancreas and start producing insulin
Interesting.
again. And I thought, well, that's cool and kind of encouraging, because one day they'll figure it out.
I'm going to start it now.
Yeah.
Everyone get your mangoes,
Yeah.
okay?
No,
Yes.
too much sugar in
Yeah,
them. So
well,
do that. They
that's a
actually make the
don't.
but I went and found the capsule. I think it's called Megaferrin.
Okay, cool.
Is the antioxidant that you can get in a capsule form. And I thought, well, what's the harm in that? I'll try it for a while. But
Absolutely.
I'm not doing it expecting anything. But
that's really cool that I
with the
think
science, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
But it fits to your narrative of how do
Yeah.
we find the natural? Because I'm thinking
Right.
implant the ViaCyte so that they actually
Yeah.
have the stem cells in there and that it has a semi-permeable membrane. So insulin. I'm thinking science. You're like, let's get this with nutrition. I love it. Why not? I think that's great.
Yeah.
2 more questions and then we'll be done.
Sure.
Define gluconeogenesis.
Oh, this is
You
a
actually
pop
do.
quiz, man.
You do know it. I was about
Yeah.
to say you definitely know this one. Usually, I'm trying to catch people off guard to be like, okay, you don't actually have to know that one. We do have episodes on gluconeogenesis.
Pop quiz. Yeah. So you're gonna have to guide me, but this is in the liver, right? And it's is the Cori cycle technically gluconeogenesis
You're
happening?
right. I'm
Yeah.
telling you this.
Okay. So
yes.
and this so really interesting, because as an athlete, and as an older guy who trains, this is a thing that I have to be aware of. And for somebody listening who gets frustrated because they have a weird spike, maybe you're even eating low carb diet, right?
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
like, oh, why is it sometimes I get spikes? Well, cortisol will raise your blood sugar, right?
Absolutely.
Elevated cortisol for a long period of time actually does a lot of other bad things that we don't want. But when we do train really hard, right, there's a certain point where you start to really elevate those cortisol levels.
Absolutely.
And the Cori cycle is part of that, because your body's being told to produce fuel, right, energy, to deal with whatever the stressful event is. And so that's
I love it.
What's happening.
I would have taken next question as an answer. I would have taken anything. That's y'all. We're getting the real deal here, right here. That's
Okay,
amazing.
thank you.
And it's true. Yeah, and too, our bodies are just very interesting at trying to maintain homeostasis. That's so interesting of how we try to balance it, and especially when we think stressors. When we've talked about your initial diagnosis of a stressor introduced. Exercise, stressor, a lot of things too. Your day, giving a presentation is a stressor.
That's right.
Stress is just so interesting. I love now I'm going to start thinking about peace instead of stress.
Yeah.
Oh God, the Rogers family. Can we get some peace? I don't know. But last question. Last question. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you would give to someone that's either maybe recently diagnosed, maybe someone who was diagnosed under similar circumstances, or even someone young or been around the block with diabetes? What would you give them as encouragement or advice?
If you've just been diagnosed, it's not the end of the world. And if you're an older adult like me who got diagnosed recently, it's going to be a major shock, but you are definitely in a good position to be able to make the changes that you need to be able to manage it and not have it manage you. And I am not a special case. I'm an unusual case in that I'm really a self-starter, but anybody can make the behavior change that they need to do what I'm doing. I'm not superhuman. I have temptations. I walk past a cake, and you've got to understand, I was a guy who I worked out hard to be able to eat dessert.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And certain things now are just dead to me. You can do that, and I think the trade-off's worth it, right?
Absolutely.
100% worth it in the end. And it is hard, but it's not impossible. And it actually, 2 years in, I'm more committed to the strategy that I adopted than ever. And I wouldn't, to me, there's no other way. I understand there are other ways, and people have all sorts of strategies to manage their diabetes. And if it works, hats off to you. But I'm all about efficiency, and that's just kind of how I approach things. And the way I see it, my approach is probably, it feels like the most efficient approach that I've found. And if there's a better one, I would love to see it. I'd be open to it. But for me, this is just the most efficient way to manage it. And I think it works.
And if you have different approaches, please put it in the comments section so that Derek and I can actually do those approaches too. But I like that not letting diabetes manage you, but you manage diabetes. We have so much not control. Some of it is out of our control, but there's a choice. And I think so much about what we can do, there's alternatives to it. And I think that's such a nice light that you've brought to us to be able to showcase some different ways of how to manage it and how to even think about it too. I think that's brilliant. And dude, maybe they need to come see you at Vital Wellness and get some advice too, because all this deals with metabolic syndrome, and there's different pathways. And we get back to peace, sleep, nutrition, exercise.
That's it.
Those are the 4 pillars, all right?
That's the framework right there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us on the podcast.
Really
thank you
it.
for showing us again another stop along the Diabetes Tour Guide. And until next time, we will see you soon. Thanks again.